Good afternoon. We are standing in one of the most amazing places in the Pacific Northwest. This is the west-southwest corner of the Steens Mountain in Harney County, Oregon. This mountain is 9,700 feet high, and it is loaded with canyons, deep gorges that were created by large glaciers. This area at this time of month and year in September is loaded with migrating birds and butterflies and blooming plants. So I'll talk about the blooming plants first. There is a massive bloom of gray rabbit brush right now, and they are brilliant yellow, saffron yellow, and they are currently hosting large numbers of native flies, bees, wasps, and some butterflies. This is the last great offering of pollen and nectar before the freezes hit in another week and a half or so. One of the butterflies that we located today was the Mormon meadowlark. This is one of the most beautiful butterflies in the Pacific Northwest. Never let its size discourage you from looking for it. The colors, the spots, the gorgeous burnt oranges and reds, it's just an amazing butterfly. This butterfly comes out the end of August, emerges from its chrysalis in August, and is found until freeze up, sometimes way into October. A lot of Mormon meadowlarks are found in lower elevations. Right now we're at about 7,000 feet, and it's a high elevation for meadowlarks. The interesting thing about them is that they love to nectar on snow buckwheat and gray rabbit brush. Well, there's no snow buckwheat where we are right now, only the gray rabbit brush. We found a very small species of sulfur butterfly, which is very difficult to locate, and I was frankly surprised to find it. And it was also nectaring on gray rabbit brush. So that was unexpected treasure that we came across. Some other butterflies that we have observed today in migration were California tortoiseshells. And these beautiful butterflies are headed south, away from winter in the Pacific Northwest, down into California. And we saw dozens of them moving south this morning and this afternoon. They tend not to nectar on the rabbit brush. One other butterfly that does nectar on rabbit brush is the Corona fritillary, which is a light orange and black spotted butterfly, which is much bigger than the Mormon meadowlark, and it's a beautiful butterfly. But they love desert regions, low rainfall sites, and they are here on the Steens Mountain. Another butterfly species we observed today was a painted lady in migration south. And another one was the Lorquin's admiral, also moving south. And so all these butterflies are migrating just like migratory birds do. Some of the birds that we observed today were raptors, and they were red-tailed hawk. There was a northern harrier, and these birds are also in migration south. They are an amazing group of birds because they nest all over the Pacific Northwest, and a lot of those raptors that we saw today are birds that nest here but winter in the San Joaquin Valley of California. Another species we saw today were savanna sparrows. We saw many of them, along with chipping sparrows and white-crowned sparrows. And all of these sparrow species nest further to the north, but they also are in migration headed south. The white-crowned is a bird that often stays in warm spots here in the Pacific Northwest and tries to stay the winter. And if the winter gets too bad, then they migrate out. But in the valleys, the lower valleys of the Pacific Northwest, in desert areas, they often will stick around all winter. Another interesting place that we were today was called the East Rim Lookout on top of the Steens Mountain. And this area overlooks the Alvord Desert and looks deep into Idaho to the east. It's a vast, vast area. And oftentimes when we're driving through the Northwest, we don't realize how absolutely vast this area is. And when you get up on top of the Steen here, you suddenly realize the vast acreage and many square miles that Oregon covers. And because this is all federal land, most of it is federal, there's some patches of private property, but most of this is federal lands. It is accessible by numerous people of the public. And it is outstanding. I would urge you to come and visit. It is absolutely a beautiful sight. It has vegetation unlike many other areas in the Pacific Northwest. Right now I'm standing here looking at coral leaf mountain mahogany, and I'm looking at rabbit brush and bitter brush and all kinds of desert plants that are incredibly tough. And if you can admire plants, these are the plants I admire, because they are capable of surviving fires, and they're capable of surviving drought, extreme cold, and they come back every single spring. So this is an area for the tough, not the pansies. And I will tell you that many of the birds and animals that live here are also very tough creatures. On our way to the Steens Mountain, we came across several species that were enjoyable to watch and always interesting to see. One was a greater yellow legs at a small little reservoir, and this is a shorebird that is in migration, headed south, away from winter. It has a unique call, but it's a beautiful, beautiful shorebird. Another species that we came across on our trip was a good-sized herd of elk, Rocky Mountain elk. And there was one big bull and 10 smaller bulls and about 30 cows there with 5 or 6 calves of the year. And this big bull was trying to flush all the other bulls out of the herd. And because they were all spike bulls and they have strong links to their parent, their mother, they weren't leaving. They would run out and away from him and then right back to the herd. So he was doing his best to get rid of them, because it is the rut and elk are breeding right now. And he does not want those young bulls in his herd. And so this 5-point bull was doing everything he could to get them out of there. While on our adventure start this morning at Refuge Headquarters at Malheur, we came across an absolutely beautiful adult red-shouldered hawk. This is a species of hawk that moves into the Malheur area in southeast Oregon in the fall of the year. It does not breed here and is only found in September, October, maybe early November. They are an absolutely beautiful bird, and their primary prey base are amphibians and small rodents. And to have one sitting at headquarters was really exciting. Yesterday, north of Druzy, Oregon, on our way south, we came across another red-shouldered hawk along the Malheur River. And that was exciting because I'd never seen a red-shouldered on the Malheur River, so that was fun. The first one I ever saw in this region was in about 2001. And so they have been seen now consistently every year. And I understand that right now at Malheur Refuge, there are at least 3 known red-shouldered hawks on the refuge. So they're becoming more numerous and found more often. So that's an interesting deal. Another raptor that we saw was a broad-winged hawk, which is an uncommon hawk, unexpected hawk, and it is a bird of the Midwest, Southeast, and the Eastern seaboard. And we get a few in the west, few dozen, and this particular bird was perched on a telephone pole early this morning, and Dan was able to get some beautiful stills of it. This is a bird that travels south, usually with Swainson's hawks, and they return in huge kettles through South Texas with other raptors. And they are a small buteo, which is the family of hawks that red-tailed hawks and red-shouldered hawks and ferruginous hawks are all members of, the buteo family, which just means broad-winged hawk. And so broad-winged hawks are broad-winged hawks, buteo, buteo. And so it's an unexpected species here this time of year. So that is an interesting bird to see. Another thing that we have noticed this year, and that is we're in a drought. And many places that typically hold water are bone dry. There is no extra water anywhere in this whole region, from Walla Walla south to the Nevada line and deep into Nevada. There's no water. And so wildlife really suffers when there's not enough water. And so what wild animals and wild birds do is they move down into areas with a flowing stream or a spring. And right now, if we were to go down into this canyon, down to the stream in the bottom, there would be many more migrant birds and animals that are there because they're dependent on water. Water is so important for wildlife and migrating animals like butterflies and birds. Another plant that we have had the great privilege of observing today is Quaking aspen. Most of the canyons and most of the high table water areas on the Steens Mountain have loads of aspen. In fact, I'm standing here looking at a canyon behind the photographer that is loaded with aspen. Today, the aspen were starting to change color, and they were yellow ones, orange yellow ones, tangerine ones, absolutely beautiful. Most people have no idea that the Steens Mountain is loaded with aspen, and yet they are high elevation tree species that require a high water table. And many of the areas on the Steen are what are called perched aquifers. And that means that those are big bowls, hold water, usually snow melt, and aspen require that their roots be in water. And as long as their roots are wet, they're doing just fine. And so in these areas where the aspen are, you see small aspen along the outer edge and the taller, more mature trees in the center. And that's because aspen are genetically identical in any population in a wet area because they all come off the same main root system of the first adult to establish there. So they are genetic identical twins. Or I would guess you would call it millions of them. Sometimes whole forests of aspen are genetically identical. So they all have a common ancestry. They are an amazing plant, and oftentimes in the Blue Mountains and here on the Steen, in the Pueblos, in the Oregon Canyon Mountains, and in the Trout Creeks, all the valleys are full of aspen, and some of them are huge. I've seen aspen in these mountains that are 36 to 37 dBH. That means diameter at breast height. And for an aspen, that's a big, big tree. And considering how cold it gets here, the very short growing seasons, that means that tree is very old, and it has survived numerous very cold winters and dry, dry summers, and sometimes very hot summers. They are truly a phenomenal tree. Another interesting species that we have found on the Steens Mountain is a grasshopper species that's flightless. It's called a stone grasshopper, and its camouflage base is to look just like a stone in the area. And if you're walking along and they do not move, you will never separate them from a stone on the ground. They look and act just like a rock. And that's for survival, because there are numerous birds and horned larks and other birds that will feed on them if they hop and move around. So when they see a larger animal, they tend to get out of your way. And so you get to see them. But they are truly a magnificent, well camouflaged, about an inch long grasshopper species. And they live all over the bare flanks of the fault block that is the Steens Mountain that's pushed up. And they live on those top 1,000 feet on those high elevation bare flanks. So really a cool grasshopper. Another species that we have come across in this region are feral horses. Wild horses are, as they're known by some, are just feral farm animals. And there are literally hundreds of them right out to the right of me, west of where I'm standing right now. And they do a lot of damage. They damage spring heads, any seeps, they trump and flatten all the vegetation and cause erosion issues. They congregate in areas that other wildlife can't get to because the horses are there. And the interesting thing is, a lot of people have this deep emotional contact with wild horses. And because they believe they're part of the flora and fauna of the Old West. Well, they were, because they escaped farms and ranches and escaped the tribes. And so their descendants now run free on public lands in large numbers. They frequently fall prey to diseases, they fall prey to predators, and some of them get shot by people who have no love for them. And another way that they get taken out of the populations is they are captured by the federal government and put up for adoption. And there's a fair number of people that adopt these feral farm animals, just so they don't release them again. Wild horses have actually changed a lot of water sources for wildlife because of their dominance in those areas. There are two features on the Steens Mountain that when you come here, you never want to miss. One is Kiger Gap, which is due north of me, and it looks like a big bite out of the rim of a glacial canyon gorge. And it looks like some giant took a big bite out of it. Well, that's called Kiger Gap. And Kiger Gap actually has a trail that goes up to it, And if you're a brave soul, you can climb down into the Kyger Gap and back up the other side. But it's a huge area. From where you stand to look at Kyger Gap above Kyger Gorge, it doesn't appear to be all that big a deal. But you get yourself over there and suddenly you realize that this is a massive area and it's steep and you have to be very careful or you will forever be in Kyger Gap. So it is an amazing place and it's beautiful, but it's very dangerous if you go walking over there and you're not prepared to rock climb. Look at it from a distance and enjoy it that way. Another feature on the Steens Mountain is Wildhorse Lake, which is a lake that you can view from the highest road in Oregon, 9,700 feet. And Wildhorse Lake is this beautiful lake in a cirque on the south end of the Steens Mountain. And there's a trail you can take from the highest road in Oregon and walk all the way down to Wildhorse Lake. It's a long hike and it's a steep climb out of there, but the lake and the surrounding area around it is absolutely beautiful. A lot of wildlife utilizes Wildhorse Lake, and contrary to its name, there are no wild horses there. It's really an interesting area. Lots of deer and other animals use that area. So scattered all over the deserts of the Pacific Northwest, from the Nevada border clear to the British Columbia border, is an insect that is very noticeable in the summers in powder dry sand, soil, and silt. And it is called an antlion. And this is an insect larvae that builds a conical pit in that soft soil and sits there with these big pincers and waits for insects to fall down into his trap, and then he grabs them, sucks all their juices out, and then flips the dry exoskeleton out of his trap. These insects then mature and they become a flying insect with 4 wings that looks like a miniature dragonfly. And they have very short antennae, and that's the adult antlions. And they breed, lay eggs on the ground, and when those eggs hatch, the baby antlions start digging their traps. They're really an interesting animal. And they actually have big arms or legs that they use as oars to move around underground and to dig their trap. So, interesting animal.